about that how to become a full stack developer starting from scratch. So why become a full stack developer? If you see the salary, the average salary of a full stack developer is way above 110k, right? So which is way above like an average person would earn. And the level of skills that are required are relatively simpler. Like you don't have to spend like 4 years doing a degree, right? So you could relatively get started. Like maybe you'll have to spend like 4 or 6 months to go through the entire process and to run like very relevant skills which will for sure help you in getting a full stack developer job. So let's go step by step throughout the entire process, that what it takes to be a full stack developer starting from scratch. So the step one would be learning some of the web application development fundamentals, right? So these fundamentals are available on sites like Coursera, edX, Udemy, etc. So a lot of these courses are free or they charge, like there's very less money that's required to do these courses. But when you choose these fundamental courses, make sure it's simple, it's not too tough, right? It requires less time, because if you're spending a lot of time upfront, you'll not be able to spend time on the other pieces which needs a lot of details and all. So there is more theory and there's less coding involved in these pieces. So make sure like the time to completion is less than like 40 hours for each of these courses. So when you see the contents of the course, make sure it covers what HTTP protocol is, and it talks about request and response, right? What happens when you click a URL in a browser, like how the entire thing works, what is a server, how it responds back with the data and all. So it should tell you about the basic components of the website, like first being front end, second being data, back end, third being the database. And it's also good if the course talks about other things like HTML and CSS. But even if it doesn't talk about those, that's fine. I'll also be covering like some of these courses, means that I would be covering that what like how to find these courses in my coming videos. So the step number 2 would be choosing a language, and the language of choice should be JavaScript. First is it's simple, and second is it is used in the browser to render the front end, and also it's used on the back end. So you don't have to learn like multiple languages to create a full project end to end. You just have to do one language and you could be just done with the entire project, right? So step number 3 would be, after you have learned the basics of the language, develop a simple website, like a simplest web page, which where you create a record, like update a record, delete a record or something. And when you do that, you will have to learn few other skills. The few other skills that you'll have to learn is HTML, CSS, and when you interact with the backend, you would most probably be using like RESTful services and all. That's the latest architecture which everybody uses. And you would also have to save the data somewhere, so you have to use some database could be either Postgres, MySQL, or it could be MongoDB. So after you have learned like these basic web application technologies, the next step would be learning a JavaScript framework. So whenever we are doing an enterprise application, like a huge web application in a real industry project, there are multiple frameworks that we use in one project, right? So the 3 most famous frameworks that are used in like the web world these days are React and Redux on the front end side, and on the back end side it's Express.js, which is used for developing RESTful web services and all. So these frameworks are not so complex. There is a learning curve involved with this, but it is compared to any other technology which you would learn, right? So step number 5 would be, as you would be practicing those frameworks or as you would be doing those smaller projects, you'll also get to familiarize yourself with some of the other developer tooling and all. So first thing when you start coding would be, you'll have to choose editor. So editor of choice could be like a VS Code, which a lot of JavaScript based developers use these days, or it could be IntelliJ Webs or IDEA. Next would be like when you're writing the code, you would want to save your code in an incremental way. For that, use a version control system, and Git is the default choice everywhere these days. And the third thing would be you'll be learning some day-to-day skills which are required for coding. First would be interpreting the requirements. So as you work on the project, you'll get to know that okay, this is what you've written on the page, and this is how you implement it in a software, right? So you'll understand how to interpret those requirements, and working alone, you might not know that how do you interact with the peers and all, but that's fine. And after you're done with a simple project, try to deploy it somewhere so that you know that how, like where the code gets pushed and all after the team is done with developing that code and all. And the next step would be choose a good project which you can work on, right? Maybe you just spend like a couple of months or like a month at least working on that project. So when you're choosing a project, make sure that it has 5 or 6 different screens, because so that you can understand like as the application flows from one screen to other, you know that how the flow works, right? Like what all is involved in fetching the data, and how the next screen shows up, so you understand those things. And so you could use something like a library software, or you could use some employee payroll software, or you could use something like a chess game or something, right? So let's take an example of employee payroll software. So in that case, you would be having like few screens. One is like adding of the employee, listing of the employees and all, and then few other screens would be listing of all the salaries of all the employees, right? And then make sure whatever project you choose, it has few entities in it. So in an employee payroll project, the entities would be like employees, and then other entity would be their addresses. Third entity would be their salaries and all, right? So make sure you have at least 4 or 5 entities, so that you understand that how they relate to one another, how they are stored into the DB, right? And when you need to get that, right, how do you perform logic to fetch all of the data in one go. So once you're done with such a project, you will be very close to having a real enterprise or like a real industry experience, right? So there would be a lot of roadblocks that you'll hit on the way while you'll be working on this project, but that will give you an experience of a job of a software developer, because we face these roadblocks every day, right? And then you have to Google out that what's the solution to it, right? You have to find those solutions by yourself, but this will help you a lot in developing and refining your skills. And once you're done with a good project, so make sure you prepare for the interviews. A lot of people, they skip this step, and because there are fewer companies who would be hiring who will be hiring individuals without a computer science degree or without any experience. So make sure whenever you are applying to those companies, you give your best shot. So the way to do that would be, first give some mock interviews to your friends or some seniors who are already working in the industry. And once you're done with it, apply to the in the cities which might be your last preference. So if you get a job there, that's good. But even if you don't get, at least you get to have some practice and all, right? And the third would be, apply to at least 200 job openings, because there are very few companies that reply back to individuals who are just starting their career. But for sure, if you're applying to 200 companies and all, there would be a few who will always reply back, right? So, and all you need is just one job to get started with. So I hope all of these steps would help you out in starting from scratch to getting full stack developer job. If you have any other questions, or like if the full process is not clear to you, let me know in the comments below, and I'll for sure answer them. Thank you.